So, what kind of spiders do we have in our houses? Well, you're probably familiar with the large house spider, the one you see in the autumn that comes crawling across the hearthrug, stops still and then vanishes, and everyone's frightened as to where it might have gone. This species is actually called Tegenaria, and there are a number of these. Although it's quite a large spider, what it's actually doing is looking for a mate for a female so it can produce the next generation of spiders. And it is actually quite harmless. You're more likely, in fact, to damage the spider than you are to be damaged yourself. The other species that you're likely to find in rather different places is sometimes referred to as the daddy long-legged spider. Now this is Pholcus phalangoides, and it lives in places like cellars, sometimes called the cellar spider, outhouses, greenhouses, conservatories and so on, anywhere which is slightly less disturbed. Now this is the species which produces absolutely enormous webs that are so beloved of people who want to set up scenes for haunted houses and old mansions and so on. Big stringy webs which are designed to catch the prey that this spider actually lives on. But Pholcus has something else as well, quite an unusual spider behaviour, and that is if you touch the web it will suddenly start spinning in a vertical plane, and it's a kind of anti-predator behaviour. It's trying to avoid being caught. But like the ordinary house spider, it's actually completely harmless, and again it's actually a very fragile spider. Now of course you may want to get rid of these spiders because you don't want spiders in your house, despite the fact that they're actually quite good at controlling flies and other species perhaps you don't really want. These are domesticated animals effectively. If you actually put them outside, there's a good chance, certainly with the house spider, it will walk straight back inside your house again. If you put it farther away, it'll probably walk into a neighbour's house, so you're not going to get rid of them that way. Personally, I quite like these two species because they have very different lifestyles. They're both predators, they eat the same sorts of food, but they actually behave in totally different kinds of ways. And they've probably been associated with us for a very, very long time.